Dark Season was a 6-episode 1991 children's sci-fi fantasy drama from Russell T Davies, his first show unto himself. 3 decades later, it returns for 12 episodes, now audio dramas under the company Big Finish rather than TV episodes under the BBC. And these mostly focus on a new trio of school children warding off dangerous technology and vaguely supernatural adults abusing authority, but also bringing back Kate Winslet and ultimately everyone from the old show, really. The first 3 serials, so the first 3 sets of 3-parters here, are by Big Finish writers, but then you well and truly have a Russell T Davies finale, because it's literally a finale written by Russell T Davies alone. And so it's quite interesting to see RTD revisit old characters of his after a long period of not writing them, isn't it? So, discussing this second series of Dark Season today with me, Dark Season Legacy Rising, will be the same Dark Season fans I chatted about regarding the TV show, Bryn and Oliver, both from England. So we'll go through the 4 stories in a row in a minute, but first, how did you both feel about this second series happening, and what were your sort of overall thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, this Big Finish series was really exciting. You know, the more details we knew about it, you know, we talked at the end of the last one about how exciting it was to have all of that old cast returning. But then actually listening to it, I think it was, the new cast was so great. And I think it did actually do quite a good job of striking that balance of really, you know, as I'm sure we'll get into, focusing on that new cast for the first 3 episodes before the finale really, you know, brings in all the older ones. And it was really interesting to think about it as effectively being like, you know, a legacy sequel, which is obviously quite kind of popular now, this thing of bringing back the older characters as well as introducing a new generation. And I think, you know, arguably it handles that better than some much bigger properties in the way it actually, you know, fairly serves the new cast without overshadowing them. So I was really happy to hear it.
Yeah, the original's so era specific. The thing I was really interested in is how it would be updated. And the premise of the original show almost feels quite dated these days. Ooh, spooky computers moving into a school. How scary. But the way that those ideas were updated, I was actually really impressed by. I feel like it cuts to the modern day in a really interesting way. So that was my main takeaway.
Yeah, I saw Russell say in an interview that it was kind of a proto-millennial or millennia-focused type show, the TV run, because Marcy had that stuff about, you know, the coming of the new millennium, and it was all about, you know, fears of technology working differently. And then that, around, you know, the Y2K years, that was a much bigger thing. And then Scott Handcock kind of compared it to Black Mirror and stuff now in that interview. Like, being scared of, or, you know, being wary of incoming technology has always, you know, been around. But it does kind of feel right, this 30 years later sequel, I agree. Kind of, it feels of a pair in a way that, you know, the first one was very 90s, this one's very now, but they do feel, it all just kind of coheres together. I agree with Bryn that it handles the legacy stuff quite well as well. What do we think of our main new trio that lead the first 3 stories, really? Taylor, Jack, Nina. What do we think of them and how they compare to our old trio of Marcy, Reet, and Tom?
Yeah, I think they're a trio that in terms of the kind of storytelling you can do with them, make a lot more sort of sense than the original trio. You know, the original trio are really iconic and really fit in that Dark Season, but it's very much, as I think some of them discuss in the extras, it's, you know, Marcy is there, the one that's kind of pushing the narrative forward and kind of has all the kind of, if not knowledge, then the intuition, and, you know, Thomas and Reet are almost like the muscle, or, you know, kind of the more active ones physically, but like, it's very clearly like Marcy is the leader. And while this new trio sort of has a Marcy substitute figure in Taylor, the kind of specific skills of each 3 of the characters are much well defined, which in terms of, you know, for the individual writers approaching it and having to think, okay, what's this character going to do in this story? I feel like must be a lot easier for them with, you know, 3 characters who have, you know, one of them has this kind of more Marcy-like intuition and kind of the technological fear and stuff. But then obviously with Jack, you then have the science focus and the physical fitness and skills with Nina. It kind of, it feels like a trio that's designed for these kind of adventure stories more specifically, which I think works quite well in distinguishing them from the original while also servicing the stories being told.
Yeah, I laughed listening to the extras when James Goss, old reliable as Russell called him in another extra, how he described Marcy kind of does everything that needs doing in the old show, and the others, the talents are less equally spread. I think he said something like that. And yeah, quite astute. And I think, it's a good mix in this new series, how there are a lot of situations where, one of them is going to be more important, and it's not just all kind of on Taylor. And Taylor's a little less, they're not quite as, I think, forceful as Marcy. And then, that's a good thing. They feel like their own character. They don't just feel like a Marcy 2.0 or a Reet 2.0 or everything. So I quite liked how they spread out the abilities of the main trio like that. I also thought it was interesting, even just hearing like James Goss kind of openly say, well, this bit of the original show was, a little bit wonky. I think that's interesting because you've got two writers of this season that are very hooked into the original show. Of course, you got Russell himself doing the finale, and then Chris Chapman doing the second episode, who was an actual big fan of Dark Season. And then you've got the other two writers, Tim Foley, who did the first episode, and James Goss doing the third, who, my impression is at least Tim Foley, didn't see Dark Season back in the day. And so I don't know if James Goss did, but he seems a little more casual about it with how he talks about it there. So I think that's a good spread as well, that you've got some, very connected writers with it, and then you've got some more, newcomers to it. That's a good mix as well. Good mixes all around.
On the flip side, I did think that it is good to give them their own skills, but Jack being a smart, sciencey, computery one, and Nina being a sporty, slightly cooler one, it's slightly broad as far as big character ideas go. Maybe it's the performances, but something about the original, I found Reet and Thomas, I don't know, more textured, more actually existing. They develop well. Nina and Jack develop well across the box set. But the initial ideas are a bit broad. I found Taylor, I think, is fabulous though.
Yeah.
I think they're an incredible character and such an interesting follow-up to Marcy in some slightly counterintuitive ways that I really enjoyed.
I think another interesting point of contrast between the two trios, which kind of ties into that, is how, again, we'll be talking about the first episode of this box set soon, but obviously, Thomas and Reet have such good banter in the first series and have a really good dynamic and humour that comes from that, partly because we established that Marcy and Thomas and Reet are already friends, and already it's that relationship of Thomas and Reet kind of following Marcy around is something that, even if they've not had adventures like this before, is kind of established prior to the show, whereas we kind of see this trio come together a bit more, like they are aware of each other, they attend the same school as, Jack knows Nina and Jack knows Taylor. Nina doesn't really know Taylor, but I think that dynamic of them meeting for the first time does kind of mean that you can't do quite the same humour back and forth straight away. They have to kind of work around each other and establish this relationship in a different way that we don't see. And I suppose when they don't include that in the original Dark Season, it does feel quite modern. It's just kind of cutting to the point. But now, because with this box set, you've got 4 serials and you've got a longer time to tell it, I think it's good that they're able to, show how the introduction to those characters and how they kind of meet and become this this group. Yeah. And
it's definitely not as neatly sort of hierarchical. In the original, it's Marcy's in charge and the other two sometimes have ideas. In this, it's a lot more evenly spread, which is good overall, I think.
Yeah, another difference, maybe I'm wrong, but my impression is the ages are quite different. I'm not sure what year they are meant to be in the original show, but the feeling I get, at least from like how our new trio, how they look on the cover, is they seem to be a good few years older. Am I off base there, or is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think certainly the casting is older, which I think is going to make a difference in our impression of it. I'm not quite sure necessarily what they're aiming for in terms of writing. I think there's a reference at one point to Taylor being like slightly younger than the other two, but not to the same extent that Marcy was younger than Thomas and Reed by like 2 years in the original. But yeah, I do wonder how much of that is just the casting. And obviously you have these images of them on the cover, but still it is primarily an audio medium. And if there's anything Big Finish can do, it's definitely have actors who are much older playing younger parts. But yeah, you definitely do get that sense because the casting for the original was, all the actors were actually teenagers, whereas that's obviously not the case here.
Yeah. I was amused listening to that YouTube interview between Russell and Handcock that originally Russell was thinking like, oh, could we do like a series 2 set a year after the original series? Like, is the voice work going to work for that? And Handcock, having so much experience with audio, was saying, no, that's not really going to happen.
That would make sense, yeah.
I feel like they're going into A-levels, which puts them at, 16, 17. So a whack older than in the TV show. Because they talk about dropping subjects and things like that.
But yeah, I mean, I still think with the casting, obviously, it's so much older. And that's a decision that I think is kind of reflects the needs of the medium and the fact of, obviously, with the casting of the actors, I think they are all cast quite well. Obviously, when Jacob Dudman was announced for it, he's someone who has quite a long association with Big Finish, which I think it actually kind of then helps that in comparison, the other two actors are not people who were previously associated with Big Finish, so it doesn't feel too much like it's just, okay, who have we got that we've worked with before? There's some interesting casting choices there.
And they talk about it in the behind the scenes, but it's nice that Dudman gets to, play his own character this time instead of doing impressions, which is usually his role. And I think they're all pretty good.
Obviously, he's doing acting anytime he plays any of the Doctors, but it is kind of affected by that performance. So I think the fact that he's playing, gets to play quite a young character who's got quite a distinct personality of his own, even if it is kind of trended in those geeky stereotypes, it's a good choice that allows him to see a different side of him as an actor than he might have done in previous Big Finish stuff. But yeah, I thought the other two castings were kind of revelations, just because they give such good performances. It's H. Wiley as Taylor and as Nina as Bethany Antonia, and both of those just feel like great casting choices to me. I don't know what you thought about those two actors and their performances.
Yeah, I thought they were pretty fab. Something I think is I thought was really interesting and understated, but sort of tasty and gendery, was I think it's Scott Handcock who talks about wanting one of the main trio to be non-binary.
Yeah.
And the decision to make that the sort of Marcy figure, the character who's most inquisitive and interested in asking big questions and figuring out the truth behind things. For me, that person then realizing they're non-binary makes perfect sense. Because I think for a lot of people, gender questioning comes out of that sort of instinct to go, wait a second, I don't trust this whole system. And start asking big questions. So I thought that was really neat for Taylor's character.
Yeah, and it's that's such it's a good thing for the character. That's a decision that obviously the production crew made, but then it is understated in the writer. At their initial introduction, there's a slight sort of subtle moment of questioning from Nina, and Jack just informs them of Taylor's pronouns, and then from there it's almost not brought up again as far as I can recall, and that is kind of all you need. I think that's something that really grounds the series in the 21st century. That's again, they're doing whatever they can to show the 30-year gap between the two, and I think that's something that does that very kind of subtly. And yeah, it's great to have the casting of H. Wiley in there as a non-binary actor who uses, I think, they, them, and he, him pronouns going from the behind-the-scenes extras. And that was another a great element of the behind the scenes extras, just having actors introduce themselves with their pronouns. I think that felt appropriate to have everyone doing that, because it can too easily become on stuff like that where actors who are gender non-conforming introduce themselves with their pronouns and everyone else just acts like it's assumed. So I think it was a good editorial decision there to have those, and really, supportive and inclusive for the non-binary, gender non-conforming actors in there. And yeah, I just think, H. Wiley's so good in the role, and as they say, it's kind of like a dream casting if you're told you get to play, Kate Winslet's non-binary child in a Russell T Davies drama. So it must be an absolute great thing for an actor like that, because, I have friends who are actors who are non-binary and who have to be cast as, cisgender parts quite a lot. And I know that anytime they get offered a part that actually is a non-binary part, they're very excited by that. And so especially this proposition must have been a real great moment for them.
Yeah, totally.
I particularly enjoyed Mr. Eldritch using correct pronouns, which is obviously the right decision to make from a storytelling point of view. But it's also, I don't know, I found it a bit funny that the embodiment of all evil ever is still quite respectful.
Yeah, and he doesn't have to ask, seemingly. I suppose the idea is that he's been around as like a dark presence at the school, so he's aware, he's made a note of that, while he's been, yeah.
Maybe he's just got good gender senses.
Yeah.
He sees Taylor and goes, yeah, they're non-binary.
Well, I guess we'll move into the episodes now. I love the structure of this. I think it's just a really smart, cool structure to do, like, the whole... I mean, I like the original structure of the show, which, lots of shows have done that, the whole 3-parter, as one serial kind of thing. I think 3 parts is a good amount of parts, because it saves you from spacing out a bit too much, but it keeps things kind of pacey. So I like 3-parters in general, but this whole idea of let's do, like, throughout the school, progressions, spring, summer, through, like, the school year. I thought that was a really fun thing to do, and it let them kind of start the relationships like we talked about in the first episode, then kind of time skip on a bit. I just thought that's a really fun, neat structure for the sequel to do that. And also it gives you, like, this isn't just a series 2, it's kind of a series 2 and 3 in how many episodes there are. This is, twice as many as the TV show itself. So there's lots of stuff here. So the premiere, Spring by Tim Foley, so not one of the big Dark Season nerds like Chris Chapman, introduces all our characters. The plot is about the whole kind of mythical Janus kind of stuff. There's solid gold transformations and alchemical happenings are going on, and Smart watches fused to the supply teacher, casual teacher's wrist, and then their daughter is in the window and they're doing online classes at home all the time and stuff, father and technology and all this kinds of stuff. I quite like this one. This is one of the ones I liked more. I thought it was a pretty strong opening, and it just felt totally like Dark Season to me, and not in the way that, the finale is obviously a throwback. We're actually bringing back the old stuff. That just felt in the vein. It was just like Bryn said at the start. This felt like a well-handled kind of sequel, rebooty kind of thing to me. I like the premiere quite a bit. What did you two think of it?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the elements that really made me sort of go, oh yeah, this is working. This is what, makes sense for a Dark Season sequel, is how kind of the science fiction fantasy elements of it are kind of grounded in this mythology that's the kind of mythology that, children would be aware of. There's an interesting thing where obviously this is the sequel to a children's TV drama, but because of sort of the nature of audio drama and the accessibility of it, it might not necessarily reach that many children, but I think it's still grounded in that in a way which helps it feel in keeping with the original show, because the references to, Midas and turning things to gold, and Janus as the god with 2 faces, and even like alchemy and stuff is the kind of stuff that children of the age of the target audience of the original Dark Season TV series would probably have, an awareness of, especially the King Midas thing. And I like how it brings those elements into the story and kind of reminds you that this has got that fantastical, childlike wonder element, which obviously then fits with the fact that it's centered on the perspectives of child characters witnessing this as well. And so that really, it gave me that assurance of it being quite within the Dark Season vein. I really enjoyed that.
And as well as the mythology, I think across the stories, but in the first one in particular, the technology is really well centered on things that children will be familiar with, in a slightly odd, uncanny way. The smart doorbell, something that's popped up in the last few years and is strange. And if you're a kid and you notice someone in your neighborhood has that, that's a thing. There's room for the uncanny there. And stuff like that in this first story really takes advantage of. So it feels very, just like the original Dark Season, feels really well aimed at children. And I think it would be a shame if this didn't reach a child audience.
And in terms of that kind of, obviously we've talked a lot already about the kind of 21st century and how it kind of distinguishes itself from the original, but the first sort of 5 minutes of this is full of kind of like pop culture references and references to sort of modern social media. It's talking about people putting stuff on their stories, and there's I think Tom Holland gets like a name check, and that,
yeah,
I think it does a good job of saying this is the 21st century, and I think cramming a lot of those references right in at the start is kind of a good way to do that. That's more than just the kind of modern technology, but really focusing on that cultural element. And I think it's also something that kind of distinguishes it from a lot of other Big Finish, because it makes sense when you've got these child protagonists, but yeah, like most other Big Finishes, even if they're set in the modern day, it's kind of, like in Torchwood, it's a version of the modern day that feels quite different to our own contemporary world. And obviously any Doctor Who story is kind of usually in a sort of fairly generic version of time. So I liked that kind of cultural specificity that set this apart, not only from the original Dark Season, but actually set it apart from basically most stuff that Big Finish do. It made it feel very modern and contemporary, and like how children, of that age would interact, which is something that's quite easy to get wrong, I think. So I think it does do a good job here.
Yeah, I also really liked this sequel in general does a good job of this, but especially, I guess, the first and the third episode, it really is very school focused, which was something I always liked about Dark Season, and I know Russell talks about that's one of like the tenets of the show. I love it, specifically the focus on teachers. Whether they're good or bad or good or evil. I like that it's so focused on teachers. I thought that was something interesting with the first run on TV with Miss Maitland. I think that's a fun way. The teachers aren't just antagonists, or they aren't just kind of background figures. They're quite important in the stories themselves. And so with the supply teacher here, Mrs. Horrocks, who gets fairly characterized, they're not just an antagonist that gets quite into the whole family situation and everything. I think that felt very of the same tune as the original TV run in a good way to me. I thought that was really interesting. And I liked the whole development of that. The dad and the backstory and the science and, the I will be Data kind of thing with becoming Janus, all that sort of stuff. I thought it was a pretty well-developed story. I liked that element of it. Yeah,
and it does a good job of introducing us to these characters and establishing a relationship between them. They come together because they end up involved in these same kind of crisis situations. But I also like that, again, the fact that it's 4 serials, not just 2, allows, in this one, we have kind of Jack, incapacitated for quite a bit of the at the tail end of the serial. That does, if there was less episodes in this series, that would feel like, oh, it's a shame to have that character sidelined. But actually, I think the box set as a whole does a good job of kind of balancing that, where obviously, in the second story as well, which we'll get onto, there's then a bit where Nina is out of it for quite a while. And so I think that works. And it's, in terms of the visual of having, I say visual on audio, but the visual that they're invoking of Jack turning into gold. Again, that is a classic children's TV image, as a cliffhanger on a children's TV show. You can exactly picture how that would work. It almost put me in mind of myself as a child watching the Sarah Jane Adventures in the Eye of the Gorgon episode that has the cliffhanger of Alan turning into a statue, which was like a great cliffhanger in terms of just how do you resolve that. And obviously the way in both cases of it is resolved, it's like, oh, the process isn't complete, there's a way to reverse it thing. But just as a, again, it's obviously the listening experience to this is quite different because you're likely to sit and listen through a whole serial in one go. But having those little cliffhangers in there it ties it back to the medium it comes from and the version of the series it comes from in a way that's quite satisfying. And I'm also quite glad that they don't but it's just a little snippet of the theme you get to go, look, this is your cliffhanger. It doesn't make you sit through the whole thing twice. I mean, I recently listened to the Big Finish's 8th of March, the most recent box set, and the first one of that is a 4-part serial that plays the entire 8th of March theme twice in between each episode, which is a theme that doesn't really seem like it's designed for that purpose. But yeah, it works well here. And I'm glad on whoever's editing decision that was.
It's kind of perfunctory, but in a good way. It's just kind of signaling up, this is the ending. We're in the 3-parter format, but we're not actually expecting you to space these out week to week to week necessarily. Yeah, I think that was well handled. Some of the Doctor Who ones, I think they feel kind of slavish in the TV days, you would have got the full theme, so enjoy it. But I like how it was handled here.
I found that 3 20-minute chunks across a day is quite good. I quite liked taking a break between each episode of each story. I thought the format was solid. I liked.
It is a helpful structure in that sense. My commute is about 40 minutes, so I could listen to 2 episodes, pause at the end of an episode rather than just in the middle of something, and then do the next 2 later. And I think that it's something I remember used to get talked to a lot of the Big Finish podcast about. The short trips range, which is usually like half-an-hour stories, how they were really good for commutes because you could just do one and it'd be done. And like this, if you were to take them episode by episode rather than serial by serial, that would be that those short chunks do actually make it more approachable and digestible, and even for people who kind of struggle with attention in terms of the audio drama medium specifically, because it is sometimes harder to focus on. I think that's a helpful thing. And again, it is that hope that maybe this does reach the child audience, despite the medium it's in and despite Big Finish's normal audience. And in that sense, I think that'd be really helpful as well, that structural choice.
I was thinking about the Sarah Jane Adventures as well. I think I also pictured the Eye of the Gorgon cliffhanger at that point. But one thing that did occur to me is that I love the Sarah Jane Adventures, but Dark Season feels like it's got more of a ethos, more of a focus. It's got a more precise idea that it's trying to engage with. With Sarah Jane Adventures is often just some Doctor Who monsters, and often quite disengaged from the school, and sometimes even disengaged from the sort of the childness of it. Where this feels quite precise. Every story is focused in some way around the perspective of children. And all the horror takes place on the fringes of what children know and understand. In a way that I thought was really impressive. The guest writers, even if 2 of them hadn't known the series particularly well, really keyed into the ideas that Dark Season was about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all the guest writers do a really good job of fitting in. Well, it feels like there's a sort of straight through line of, theme and tone that goes through the 4 stories, despite them being written by different writers. And obviously, there's a bit more distinction in terms of the sort of plot of the actual series. I mean, partly just because it's not, the original series, it's both series are Mr. Eldritch shows up and is evil. This one, the writers get to be distinct with what story we're doing and get to, fully resolve, or mostly fully resolve within that art, which is helpful for it. But then, it's got that shared flavour that all the writers tap into, and it definitely feels like you could listen to it all and kind of acknowledge that all those writers have kind of picked up on the same thing and gone with the same things. And I'm sure it's been well, coordinated on a producer level and a script editing level, and that's, no accident.
Yeah, there's just enough connective tissue between the stories that you can sort of feel the Eldritch in the background without needing to have him turn up every time.
Yeah. Just a little bit of spring that I thought was fun is Jacob Dudman's fixation on the website he uses, the MIM, his little nerdy science forum. Just an amusing little trait that he keeps trying to bring everything back to that. I wasn't quite sure what real world website it's trying to parallel. It's probably a couple that he keeps bringing it back to, but he sets out his nerdiness pretty immediately in the story, and it's just a fun characterization for him, isn't it? The stammering little sciencey online nerd.
Yeah, and it's funny how he's kind of trying to bring back that MIM thing and kind of keep bringing it up, and it's obviously a focus for him. And then obviously the story kind of almost rewards that for him, where then we realise that the daughter who's trapped in the house is someone that he knows from the online forum, and that's a kind of great bit of catharsis for that character, and allows those two to connect in an interesting way. But yeah, it's Jacob Dudman, I think, really does play well as this nerdy geeky character, and it's interesting how it tries to sort of characterize him in relation to kind of the school hierarchy. I'm not sure how many high schools the sort of nerdy geeky people look like Jacob Dudman, but he does it. He gets away with it well in the performance. He does it well. Yeah.
Do we have any other thoughts on spring before we move into summer?
There's a lovely little moment which I noticed where they first see Danny in the window, and I think it's Jack, but it might be Nina. Says, "Look, a girl in the window," or something like that. And Taylor doesn't gender her, because Taylor's using they to describe this person they've just seen in a window, because obviously they don't have any information about that person. And it's a tiny detail. It's just a couple of pronouns in a line, but I really liked that.
Yeah.
Taylor doesn't assume someone's gender when they see them at a window, because of course.
Interesting subtle thing that I didn't notice, but makes good sense on a characterization level. I think it also shows like a level of thought from the writer to characterize Taylor like that is quite impressive. From this box set is written by a group of entirely cisgender writers. Like, that's not something you can get
that's true
away from, but which is why I think it's good that all the sort of non-binary stuff is done in a way that's subtle, and it's not someone trying to do a big plot about this and about how it affects the character's life, because we don't really see that it does affect the character's life that much, which I think is probably a realistic representation of what it's like at quite a few high schools for people of that age. But also, it means you don't get into the muddy territory of these writers trying to tackle things that they don't necessarily have the experience to. But it's good that they are able to pick up little details like that and do them justice. I think the only other thing sort of to talk about the episode before moving on to the next one is obviously the characters, the other adult characters that it introduces that go on to the next few episodes. So obviously Miss Maitland, who has a bigger role in some of the later stories, and is obviously pretty obvious to any kind of returning audience, but this is going to be the daughter of the original Mrs. Maitland and Bridget Forsyth's character from Dark Season. And as soon as I picked up on that, I was like, oh, that's a nice detail to have, a character. Again, it's that whole legacy sequel thing, because Taylor is also the child of one of the original characters, but to have someone grounded in the school in that kind of teacher role, and the fact that they're in the library, and the library is kind of like a place that these characters can go to get help and advice from a supportive older figure. It did put me in mind of early series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, using the library as a home base there. But yeah, I think it's a great casting with Luke Caulfield, and it's a interesting character who gets more interesting things to do later on, but it was well established in this one in a way that made me think, oh, I like that character. I don't know if part of that is just Luke Caulfield's casting, because it's she's an actor I aware of and quite like already, but there was a sort of but partly it is of course the fact that she's the adult character that takes the children seriously, and because, as we later learn, she's aware of what happened with her mother. It's not like Mrs. Maitland in the original, who's a very dismissive Marcy to start off with and has to kind of be talked around and convinced around. You know, this is a character who's kind of already willing to hear these children out, which endears her to the audience pretty much straight away.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed on Miss Maitland. I really enjoyed in the first episode that they go to the library to ask really banal sort of adult questions, like how do you find out who owns a company? Because they're kids and they're getting help with the bits of, they can do all the fighting monsters and the supernatural in their own time, but they need help navigating the adult world. So I thought that was really cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good detail. I thought, I heard about it and I thought, how many times when I've been doing research for, media theory stuff or whatever, have I had to go on Company's House and look at, details about a company like that. But I was like, when I was that age, I didn't know that. And it's great. But I think it's kind of interesting in terms of the idea of what a library can actually do for people. Obviously, this is a school library, not a public library, so it's a slightly different situation. But I think there is a commentary there about just how useful libraries and having access to them and librarians can be. But, I'd like to think, while it's not exactly presented here as a political point, libraries are good and librarians are good. It's pretty much a thing you could get out of this that applies to the real world and is worth remembering every so often.
Yeah.
You get the NHS jokes on top of that.
That's true, yeah.
You don't get gold finger replacements. Not on the NHS.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
So, Summer by Chris Chapman, the big fan of the original show back from the 90s. I also really like this one. So this is... Well, Chris Chapman is like a documentary guy himself, and he's done documentaries in schools before. So this is an idea he's had for a while. What if there was a nefarious documentary crew trying to do something weird in a school with all the cameras and everything? And it feels like pure dark season, doesn't it? The adults are kind of abusing authority, and technology is being used in a creepy way, and there's, all this weird mix-up of stuff, and it feels kind of supernatural at times, but it's also a very technological threat. And it's just a very strong pitch, to kind of start with. All these cameras show up at a school, the kids start getting filmed all the time, then they start getting a little bit Lord of the Flies with like how they're put into different groups and they're competing, and it all gets a bit savage with, I want to be in this group, I want to be in that group. Weird stuff starts happening. The next story is quite similar, I guess, in some ways, of like some students get in this group, some students get in that group. This means that. But yeah, so what do we think of Summer?
Yeah, it's another really strong entry, which again, completely grounded in what you kind of expect of a children's, property, children's storytelling, because I do think the idea of, there's cameras all over the school, and then the cameras, all the cameras can absorb people and take people in. But I like how that is then grounded in the language of this actual documentary thing. The idea that obviously you're filming a whole school, but you do casting in order to get your class A and your class B that you can, focus on the narratives of. And even the thing of obviously the way the rushes in this become a sinister thing. Where it's for people who've been absorbing the camera trapped in the rushes. I thought that was a great thing that you do get because of the fact that Chris Chapman has obviously got that direct involvement in production and does that. And I just thought that was great, the idea that your rushes would become something sinister and something with people trapped in them. Obviously the sort of way it's portrayed, does again speak to various influences. It reminds me a bit of the Bells of St. John thing, where people are all trapped on the screens after being absorbed by the internet. But I think that the fact that it's grounded in the language of actual filmmaking, documentary making, helps it to feel distinct. And it's kind of that almost humorous absurdity with the whole rushes thing, but then the way it's portrayed and acted is sincere, and there's a sincere fear there, which helps kind of offset that, and I think that works really well.
The bit of uncanny that I really liked in this one was obviously the cameras and the microphones that are always listening and control your behavior. They're all very strong, mostly I think in how they relate to the cameras and microphones we all carry around with us all the time, which they talk about in in the episode a bit. But the bit that really tickled me was the idea of students going missing because teachers ask them to run an errand and then they just don't come back. That really twigged me. That's great children's horror. Because, you know, sometimes that happens. They don't go missing forever, but sometimes someone gets sent out of a class and then you don't hear from them for a while. And it's probably because they've been sent home, but what if it's not? And that whole idea of kids going missing, just in the margins, in the sinister in-betweens of the school, I really love.
This story also really starts pushing like the thematic stuff that I know Russell loves and Handcock talks about as well, of like when you're older, life grounds you down, and so you can't see stuff as well. There's certain things you can't see anymore as you could when you're a kid. And like Reet is quite self-aware about this in the stories. I think even at the end of the first serial, she might mention that to Taylor. And this story pushes that a lot more as well. You know, the three young ones can kind of suspect and observe and notice things that the older ones can't. At least that's kind of the ethos of Dark Season anyway. Whether it's true, I don't know. But this starts putting that thematic stuff into this a lot in summer, and that, you know, ties in so much with the original show, which had that sense. And it's a very Russell T Davies kind of romantic kind of view of the world. It all coheres nicely.
Yeah, definitely. By bringing Reet in here, it makes for strong storytelling. It makes sense given the setup they've done of Taylor being Reet's child, that Reet would be the character that we'd see more of, because they're already kind of the original cast phase, because they're already kind of tied into this world. And I do know in the video interview that went up on the Big Finish YouTubers that Russell refers to, you know, once they got Kate Winslet, they were like, quick, we better write up her part. And actually, like, we've got Kate Winslet now, we need to. So I like how they use that character here to give them, after their cameo at the end of the first episode, to give them a bit more of a stronger role. And yeah, it's great that they're not just then coming in and seizing the day and becoming the hero. They're very much there saying, no, Taylor, this is, you know, you've got to do this and I will help. I'll be a distraction. Again, that's, you know, a great scene to have Reet be like, well, what's my power? Oh, I'm a parent. I can go and demand to talk to the head like a parent who is dissatisfied about something going on at a school very much would do. I can kick up a fuss in the way, you know, only a parent can. But yeah, it's actually, it is clever how they kind of, obviously you wouldn't want the legacy characters to upstage the new young heroes, and the fact that the way the themes of this world of Dark Season is that children can see things that adults can't, that children have this intuition and are able to make these judgments that adults will miss because their perspective is clouded too much with kind of, you know, facts and things that they've learned in the past, is a really clever way to, you know, stop the older characters from taking over in a way that makes sense within the storytelling world and isn't just, oh, we have to keep them on the sideline because of X, Y, and Z. You know, they don't have to come up with a contrived reason to stop Reet from taking over and becoming the hero, because they already have this built-in focus on children and the strength of children.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really helps move away from the sort of dynasty storytelling that legacy sequels are often doing. Because it's not the fact that Taylor's Reet's kid that makes them special. It's the fact that they're a kid, right? And the sort of premise of the show is that all children see the world like this and they all have that intuition. And that's what's important, youth and not being ground down by life. And it's really lovely that Reet gets that moment of sort of indignantly shouting at all the producers because her kid's not okay and she's not okay with that. I just think that's a lovely moment of using the ground down adult sort of real lifeness in a way that reinforces the central story of the kids.
In terms of that, like, surveillance state commentary that, you know, I think we already picked up on slightly, you know, that idea of you know, cameras and microphones everywhere. I think it is interesting that obviously at the point where Taylor is trying to escape the grounds, that they also have, they bring, there's drones there, which is another thing where it's like, yeah, absolutely, you know, filmmaking on this scale, documentary filmmaking, drones are really common. Like pretty much every Doctor Who documentary that gets made these days that Chris Chapman is the person producing tends to have some drone filming in it. But then that also really ties in even further to surveillance state stuff, and with fears of drone cameras, because, you know, a fixed camera, maybe you can get in a blind spot, maybe you can move away from, whereas a drone camera can follow you. That's a very it's a very real fear. It's also a fear that I feel like feels very grounded in childlike stuff. You know, there's this weird kind of faceless, soulless thing that can follow you. And it reminded me of, in terms of another children's drama legacy sequel, you know, the 2019 reboot of The Demon Headmaster did really pushed a surveillance state commentary there, and had, you know, creepy drones watching everything you do, and it did put me in mind of that. And I think it is a really strong fear for a child. Like, you know, children are often afraid of any little misdemeanor they do being found out. You know, children might you know, quick, like, steal a pen or something and feel so guilty about it that even though nobody has noticed, they become paranoid that somebody has. So then the fear that you could constantly be being observed at any time, I think, is something that really strongly speaks to that childlike thing, as well as just playing into a surveillance state sort of political commentary that, you know, could tie into anyone's life, adult or child.
That's really interesting, yeah, because the whole nanny state thing is about infantilization, right? So it's about making children out of a surveilled population, like you're in school, and that's good as well. That school is itself a sort of surveillance scenario. You're expected to be watched at all times, and your behaviour recorded, in a way that's not so true as an adult, depending on what job you have. Yeah, so that precise fear of being watched is really quite childlike, but is also real and valid and a genuine concern in the modern world.
And it's I feel like, I'm trying to remember if there's a reference, but I believe Miss Maitland maybe makes a reference to that old kind of folk mythology of, like, the idea that by having your photo taken by a camera, the camera can sort of steal your soul, and how this obviously then literalizes that and has cameras, you know, stealing the whole people but capturing their soul in that way. And again, it's just it's not as focused on as in the first episode, but it's another way of kind of tying mythology and stories into this. You know, it's like, but having that kind of technological twist on it, kind of like in the original Dark Season, where, you know, the behemoth is this old kind of folk story, but then the reality of what it actually is this you know, modern computer system that's been buried with the same name. You know, it has that flavour to it of mythology and fantasy kind of meeting with a modern science fiction technology. And yeah, there's just a very good Dark Season flavour captured in this, and it feels like, I feel like this, or even more than the others, feels like if you were going to keep doing Dark Season on TV somehow, if it came back on TV, that this would be the kind of idea you do, because you could do, you know, so much visually with having it, you know, bits in the style of a documentary set in high school, and how you could invoke that. And this, it's, in some ways it feels like the most obvious idea, and yet that's not a criticism, that's actually like a strength, because they then do that and add lots of great little details into it and execute it really well. And yeah, I think in some ways this might be my favourite from the box set. It was the one that I kind of most felt like, yeah, that's what...
Yeah, me too.
I would like Dark Season to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Which, again, probably speaks to the fact, you know, Chris Chapman is the one who comes at it very much from the perspective of being a fan. Like, obviously, Russell also has quite a deep knowledge of the show, but that's from the perspective of being its creator and being someone who, you know, has been thinking about it for the last 30-odd years on that way, and has that more nostalgic element potentially, whereas for Chris Chapman as the person who was absolutely a fan of it, and I'm sure probably imagined other stories of what the characters might have gone on to do, afterwards when he first watched it. Yeah, I think it shows how useful that fan perspective is. You know, I think Big Finish can sometimes get some flack for being, you know, quite fanish, and a lot of stories written by fans, but this particular story, it's not fanish in the sense that it's just waving around fan references and things that are only for the fans. It's just, you know, sometimes the fan knows an idea and a concept better than anyone else and then can write it, you know, brilliantly because of that. And that's how it feels here.
Yeah. There's a spark to this one as well. Like, I really enjoyed in the first episode of this one, that like montage of interviews as the young people are all getting interviewed and stuff. There's a lot of like bright, I can feel like Chapman's excited to write this one. I feel like you can kind of hear that in the storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see how that would be done. That's like almost like a comedy montage type thing.
Yeah.
And the way it tells us so much about Nina and Jack's characters. Like, obviously it is very much grounded in these quite stereotypical ideas of them. But I also liked in that interview section how you kind of see Nina's like desire to please, which is kind of, it's a separate characterization to her that isn't just that she's the sporty athletic one. It's like she wants to not just answer honestly, she wants to find the right answer, as if there is a right answer for this kind of personality quiz thing. And I found that quite endearing, actually. I think it's, you know, I think too often if you've got an athletic character, then it's like they're characterized as being, you know, super confident and kind of, you know, can do anything, quite gung-ho. And I like that she's actually, there's clearly, again, I think it plays into just very real teenage anxieties of like, you know, who I am versus who I should be, or who I should want to be, or who other people want me to be, and her kind of trying to live up to that. I just found it's funny because it's engaged in such a sequence that is comedic and is designed to be comedic and is well performed in a humorous way, but I think just speaks to something very real and that actually grounds that character for me in particular.
In the later episodes in that story, you get that lovely thing of cutting between the action and the sort of editorial commentary, where the villains are deciding who to keep in the story and who to snip out. And it's framed like you're cutting to the editing room of the story itself as it's happening, which I really enjoyed. Again, that sort of structural approach that shows someone really familiar both with Dark Season as a show, but also the documentary storytelling genre in general. I
liked that in the last episode of this story, that line about the producer Goldsnap was talking about the original trio. I think they're spoken about on the dark web with delight. Just trying to visualize how exactly all that works, or how they're remembered, or who exactly is talking about them on what sort of dark web place. It's just, I think there's a kind of aspect of Dark Season. It's a little dorkily out of step with the technology it's interested in, but I think that's fun. Like, I think that's a neat kind of part of it. The technology thing that lost me a little bit, not like, I don't think this was a huge issue, but I was just kind of actually confused, is what exactly was Goldsnap doing? Like, he breaks the students into raw data, and then he sells that raw data on the dark web, and he uses the example of like for private armies. I get that that's bad. I'm kind of lost a little bit on what exactly he's. It doesn't really matter, but I'm a bit lost exactly what he's doing there.
Yeah, it is a strange one, and it's kind of like it's meant to be like the sort of raw. Again, it's meant to be tying into that thing of like, oh, children are special and children can do and see things adults can't. So it's that raw kind of ingenuity and confidence and intuition that they're supposed to be. But yeah, quite how that applies to then, quite how whoever it's being sold to can make use of that, I'm not sure is ever fully explained. But it's interesting how what it comes down to is kind of slowly clearing out the school of some people. And you do wonder, because obviously we get, you know, these hints in these first few stories, but this is in some way linked back to Eldridge and that he might be kind of funding or manipulating some of what's going on. And obviously the next story, which we'll get onto soon, like, you know, the school is being like completely cleared out. So you do almost wonder if this is like from Eldridge's point of view, his priority isn't any of that other stuff that this person's talking about of like selling on the data. It's whether it's actually like this is his first attempt at can we start to clear people out of the school before then the next story takes that to a further extreme. But that is kind of just, sort of speculation with the elements of there rather than, I think, part of the text.
And to be fair, a lot of the threat with data collection is that you don't know where it's going. So to a degree, it sort of works that the threat is being sold ambiguously, nebulously into the ether, because that's sort of how it actually works as well. So I'll allow it.
It is, again, it's like literalizing a part of that surveillance state fear, which is that, our data's being sold off, who's it being sold to, kind of thing. And it's like, actually, yeah, our data is being sold off. It's like, it's like they're selling off our soul, our identities. They can learn so much about us and then sell that data. And, maybe it's to train private armies, maybe it's to targeted advertise to us. But either way, it's not great.
I think there's a kind of metaphorical, like, school sucked out, like, my personality. School sucked out my will to do sports or whatever, that you can kind of read into it. Like, what if they could actually suck out your, your interest in books and then, like, inject that into someone else? Like, kind of feels vaguely like the idea for me. It makes a kind of sense conceptually, I think, what this story does.
I think it makes a dark season sense. Like, I think if this was a harder sci-fi, if this was a more grounded science fiction show, you maybe wouldn't get away with it as much, but I feel like it makes as much sense as anything in the original Dark Season with the Abyss computers and how they work and stuff. It's because it fits in tonally and thematically. I think that's kind of causes us to allow it. Yeah, but I guess it's because in effect he doesn't get to that stage of a plan because he's foiled before that narratively we don't really get to quite understand that. Yeah.
And Eldritch is all about names and identity. So personal data, in a way, that sort of connects together.
There was a kind of RTD-esque speech about Reed saying, like, it's good to stay small. The baddies are the ones who try and be good. You've got to stay like a kid and weave around the gaps, and that's a good thing. That also felt very kind of the same tune as the TV run to me. Not just the concept, but the actual dialogue of it.
Yeah, I think as well there's I believe that Reed pretty much directly references parrots Marcy's dialogue in this, where it's she says what's the phrase? Is it if I teach you anything? Marcy's repeated phrase from first, and I like that we don't overdo that. I don't think it gets brought back in the last episode either. So the only time it's said is kind of offhandedly saying it to Taylor in a way that wouldn't even sort of get picked up on if you didn't know it. But it's a nice element of it. We're kind of supposed to. I think we clearly see from all the stuff in this box set that Reed is kind of doing the same thing Marcy was doing. He's independent and able to kind of do that on her own now, and that Reed has that. And so to have her literally sort of parroting that dialogue, it obviously shows Reed's kind of affection and memory of Marcy, but also just the fact that Reed has kind of Marcified herself, so to speak.
No, okay. Autumn by James Goss. This one feels very similar in some ways to Chris Chapman's story to me. It's a similar kind of classifying people at school sort of story, but it's a Goss story. So this one's more about there's a special class and like the secretary is kind of taking over the school and students are disappearing and teachers are disappearing, and we keep kind of narrowing down the school setting, and we have this character Chance who is good at everything and people want to be their friends, and it's all these kind of school dynamics are going on. What do we think of this one?
It's definitely like it's less specifically technology focused, I'd say. Like, it's the other two have really clear premises that are grounded in technology and sort of bad technology. This one does feel a bit more nebulous, especially at the start, and it's kind of, I wouldn't say it was like a slow burn or anything, because it does, every scene's quite engaging, and it is quite, I think because of the sense of humour that obviously James Goss puts in there and stuff, it does go along at some clip, but it takes a lot longer for what the actual plot and the actual threat is to develop. And also the implication seems to be that it's set over a much longer period, whereas most of these, I think, spring is a couple of days, and summer as well is over quite a short period. This really feels like it's stretching out, which I think is a nice change of pace. And obviously it's kind of got that sense of being at the start of a new school year, a new academic year. So they've come back from summer holidays, but then they're also sort of moving towards the last good day that they talk about. So the idea that it's set over that entire period between kind of, the start of school starting again in early September, right up until the point where kind of the last nice kind of day of summer before autumn drudgery sets in. It's got a sense of scale that the others don't necessarily have, but maybe is slightly less focused because of that.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like suddenly there's a new member of the main cast who we've not met before, but everyone else seems to be familiar with. It's a slightly slightly familiar trope in this kind of show. And I think there's certain things that sort of mitigate that. I think the sprawling time span and the fact that it's set in the first term back after the holiday, where things naturally do change and people talk about dropping subjects and stuff like that. So it's a period of change in the school year, which sort of works. And, a new person could have turned up. That's something that happens. So that stuff helps integrate the quite familiar trope into the specific setting of the show.
Yeah, and it definitely helps that, Chance is really well performed. I mean, often when we're doing that trope of, or a new character shows up, like we've always been there, they do have it be sort of very charismatic and turn sinister, but I like how this is handled here, because Chance's first moments of turning slightly more sinister aren't like, oh, evil plan, evil laugh kind of bits. It's like just the way they kind of quite passively aggressively dismiss some things. They're really manipulative in a way that's much more grounded, in a way that I think real friends you could have at that age, or at any age, I suppose, could actually be kind of manipulative and passive aggressive. And I can't help but wonder if James Goss has had some bad experience with somebody who uses the phrase "love that for you," because that becomes like the most sort of big signifier of this kind of absolute like raw aggression under this veneer of polite jovialness. And it's sort of like, yeah, I feel like there's and the way it's written, it genuinely feels like, yeah, James Goss really doesn't like that phrase. And yeah,
I think Chance is really well characterized, and they're, like you say, they're not sort of outwardly threatening in the way you might expect. Adam in Torchwood gets quite obvious, quite mean, where in this case it's little things that feel very appropriate to a character of their age. Just being subtly dismissive or undermining people in a way that, kids do. They feel like proper eldritch power has been bestowed upon a bit of a mean person. Just sort of subtly manipulative rather than schemingly evil, and that everything else is spun out of that. And that they also seem quite unlikable in the way that a lot of popular people are, where you both see how they could be as popular as they are, and also think maybe they did a pact with the devil to get this popular, because I don't like them, but everyone else seems to. So that sort of stuff, that interfaces really well with the kind of dark seasonness of it, even if it's not technology specifically.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, while our main cast, our main trio have moments of kind of doubting Chance or being confused by Chance's presence, it's not like, say, the second episode where, like, Taylor is almost, like, completely immune to the stuff that's affecting everybody else and is constantly, is looking at it with an outside perspective. And Orion is suspicious straight away. You know, Taylor is as much kind of taken in by chance as anyone else, which I think is partly why the story feels slower, because for quite a while there's not really anyone pushing against chance or trying to figure out what's really going on, because while Taylor has a sort of general sense that there's something wrong, there's this kind of focus on the dice and stuff. Taylor seems to accept chance at face value for quite a lot of the story, which I think does contribute to that slower pace, because but I like that there's that fallibility in Taylor that we don't necessarily get chance to see in Marcy in the original show. So that's, I think, a strength, even though it means that narratively things do move slower, because there's points where it doesn't feel like there's a single kind of protagonist trying to push forward. I suppose the thing would be Jack kind of trying to push forward to get into the special class is something that keeps the narrative moving, but the fact that nobody's questioning kind of the obvious villain, again, it's part of when you do these kind of story tropes of having that character that you can't have them all pushing at it straight away, but it is interesting how it affects the pacing of this particular narrative.
Was there anything, because I didn't pick up on anything, but I might have missed something, was there anything connecting Chance's name to the dice? Because obviously Taylor rolls dice.
See, I don't think they ever do make that like an explicit connection there. It feels like something, the fact that Chance is introduced in the same scene as we, see Taylor saying that there's something weird with the dice. It feels like there's got to be something there, at least the writing of it. But yeah, I don't think there's ever an explicit connection made in the dialogue, which is, I guess, in itself an interesting choice there.
I did enjoy how underplayed Taylor's dice thing was for the whole series. Because it's a neat thing. And if you're a character who's worried about disturbances in reality, throwing dice and measuring the results, that's a fun way of approaching that. And I like that it's not super central at any point. They don't have to roll the dice to save the day or anything like that. It's just a thing they do as a tool.
Yeah, because it's just here and then very briefly in the first episode, and it's kind of, it's a nice sort of bit of characterization and makes sense in this world.
And I think we're introduced to them talking to the dice, which again gives you an idea of their sort of social situation in that first story.
There was a lot of like axiomatic, as you're red, my red, does the penguin see the full iceberg kind of stuff in that story. I think a lot of things Goss likes thinking about, but I think the main concept I liked was the kind of nonsensical school stuff of you hear like a lot of people will like say, if like someone working in retail might say, this job would be great if no one ever came in. If there were no customers, this job wouldn't be so bad actually. And same thing, teachers might think, this job could be awesome, or maybe school secretaries rather. This job would actually be really good. The holidays are great, and there's lots great about this job if it weren't for the young people that come in every day for a few hours. So I thought it was kind of a fun idea of, like, we have all these exercise books getting moved around the room, but there's no one to write in them. We have all this, stuff advertised on the notice boards, but there's no one to participate in it. Just a fun kind of nonsense, school-based idea of just removing more and more students and teachers from the school so the secretary can organize everything just right. I thought, a fun central concept for the story. Even if it was a little more, felt a little less pointed or a little less storyish than maybe the last two serials, and more like a collection of ideas to me anyway, but fun idea.
The secretary as dictator, the fact that she's kind of just accumulating this power. And again, I think it's not necessarily obvious for quite a while how that directly ties into Chance, but obviously it does develop over the course of it. But it's, just the idea of this secretary kind of seizing power from nothing. There's so much humor in that, and we get a lot of the humor through Chance and their interactions as well. I do think this story probably has the most kind of volume of humor, which I think speaks to James Goss is very strong on that stuff, and I'm glad that they were able to integrate that, because I feel like Dark Season always has a reasonable sense of humor. Usually with the main trio's interactions in the original, was the dialogue is written with a kind of a lightness and flair. This one has more overt humour in it at times, but it's still kind of just through the character interactions and the way the characters speak in dialogue. And again, like, it does the pop culture references thing a lot more again that the first episode did. You know, there's references to Taskmaster and Drag Race, and it does feel grounded in that, while also those are there kind of as part of the levity and the humour of it and Chance's character. This
story also does another of the third episode of it. Taylor gets that speech about, you know, the youth's question and the adults sink into despair around the start of the third episode. So that dark season goodness was in there. The whole telepathic batteries plugging into psychic network, I'm sure I've experienced a story that's done this thing a couple of times before, maybe even by James Goss, but that's fine. You know, the idea kind of holds together. Chance making everyone feel alone. I like how that was kind of literalized with all that stuff. And the cliffhanger was lots of fun with this one. It was great to hear that evil laugh again.
Miss Maitland's bit is wonderful.
Yeah.
Of going, everyone here feels alone. Oh, we shouldn't be running away from them. We should do the opposite. A really empathetic, lovely teachery thing.
Yeah, that's a strong beat, and definitely Eldritch's cameo here. It's there kind of a setup for the final episode, and you know, like having Kate Winslet in at the very end of the first episode, and more probably in the second episode. It's obviously tying into what's coming for the finale, you know, and setting up these characters. But it's just, I was really impressed by how strong Eldritch's presence came across on audio, even, you know, the actor being, you know, 30 years older, and as I talked about, the actress doesn't necessarily act that much anymore. But yeah, the voice gave such a presence. It's I felt like quite a strong performance, but really kind of, it made me excited for the finale in the way that kind of setup is supposed to. And although this, you know, wasn't my favourite, you know, story from the box set, you know, I came out of it because of that final beat going, yeah, I want to listen to the finale.
Yeah.
Like we sort of mentioned all the way through Autumn, you notice there's a bump between Chase and Miss Berry, is that her name? Where they're quite similar. They're both clearly sort of threatening, creeping, taking power over this school in different ways, and it's happening at the same time alongside one another, and nobody seems to notice either of them. And they sort of, to me, they bumped for the whole episode, sort of like the one story doing the same idea twice. But then you get that sort of pays off in the lovely little scene at the end where you realize they're fundamentally the same kind of person. And it's sort of bridging the adult child divide, going, this kind of manipulative, lonely, controlling instinct is more universal. And it affects both these kinds of people at both different stages of their life differently.
Moving into the finale, it's a very RTD finale, I thought. Winter by Russell T Davies. So the interesting thing with this one, well, there's a few interesting things. One is, in the Big Finish magazine vortex about this issue, it goes into this story's background a little bit, and it's saying that Russell says, Scott Handcock had lots of ideas. I couldn't work on this box set full time, but I loved his suggestions. He ran the storylines past me, and when it became clear that the ending was going to have Victoria as Marcy, Kate as Reet, and Grant playing Mr. Eldridge, it really attracted my attention. And that's when I nudged myself in. There was already a script, but I said, let me rewrite it as I have something to say. I was able to flex my muscles, and what a joy it was, as I wasn't expecting to do that at all. So yes, Legacy Rising developed between Scott and myself, particularly the last story, which was very much where I stepped in to have a say. And that's interesting because there's kind of been Russell audios before, in that he's, conceptually he's done stuff before. I know the Torchwood Aliens Among Us, he had a big hand in some of the original characters in that, and then he wrote a big pivotal scene in the finale for Torchwood Series 5 on audio. And then he's had stuff like his Damaged Goods novel, we'll actually talk about that again a bit later regarding Marcy, but that had an audio adaptation. He didn't write the adaptation. Well, he wrote the novel, but he didn't adapt it to audio. We had Mind of the Hodiak the other year where, part of it was adapted from his original scripts, and then Scott Handcock wrote like a second part to it, and there were bits moved around and changed and adapted and whatnot. But he's never like sat down and wrote like, here is my audio script, to actually raw. And I reckon you could kind of tell, but it's not a bad thing. It's very exciting to have him actually write for Big Finish. Even the actual story aside, what do you guys think about that? RTD like actually writing an audio script?
Yeah, I mean, when it was announced, it was a big surprise because, I know that certainly, as you say, with Torchwood Among Us, he had quite a bit of involvement, but I know that, there was an attempt to see if he would be more involved, and his response was straight away, no, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
It was pretty much like, I can't do that. And then, but in some ways, that it is kind of a similar story because it seemed like he was going to be much less involved among Aliens Among Us than he was. And then over the course of it, he just became more involved. He was like, actually, let me give you these character ideas and stuff, So that sort of feeling that Russell could go, oh, I can't do this because it's busy and I've got other stuff on, but would actually then end up doing more than he planned on doing, I guess is similar to this story, but the fact that leads to, an actual full story that is, credited to him. And as you say, he's never written audio drama before. And, he might be one of the most famous, most talented writers in the country or on the planet or whatever. But, that is a completely different medium. So when it was announced, I was kind of excited to see how he'd approach, how he'd be in the medium, but also just kind of excited because, it's getting to, hear another Russell T Davies script and getting him to hear his take on sort of continuing these characters. And it does certainly make sense that it's the story that is bringing back all the characters, from the original that he created and wrote those years ago. And you can absolutely see why he'd get sucked in to do that once he knew all those actors were coming back. But it is, it's in some ways it is still surprising that he made, time for it and in his schedule. And, I'm not sure exactly at what point this was being written in relation to his other projects, namely his, return to Doctor Who. But I also, wouldn't expect this to necessarily take up as much of his time as a Doctor Who script might do, and that there may have been, this may have been something that was fitted into a gap somewhere and written quite quickly. I mean, anyone who's read The Writer's Tale knows that he has the capacity to write very quickly when required and when an idea has had, time to gestate for a while. And given that, a lot of his talking in the extras about how he's been thinking about these characters for the last, 30 years, and he still has these characters in his head, you do sort of believe that perhaps, he could actually turn this out quite quickly. And it'd be interesting to see what people think of the story and whether the story kind of reflects a potential quick turnaround or not.
Yeah, I was interested. He says there was another script in the magazine. And then I know in the that Scott Handcock interview on YouTube, he says, out of the way, Scott, when he learned Kate was actually going to be properly involved. And then, that was before he was going to write the finale. So I guess the idea is, was there a Scott Handcock script, like an actual script or a treatment? There was something for the finale before RTD. And then, of course, he's solo credited for this. So I assume this was all pretty transformationally his. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly picked up when you said about that in the Vortex interview. It wasn't something I'd heard before about there being a script previously, but it does again sort of make sense. It certainly that there's a story there, there's a plan for what to do with this story, and maybe, as you say, Russell took over something that maybe Scott was working on. That would make sense as a version of these events. I suppose it's kind of like Russell's been talking recently with how he came back to Doctor Who and Doctor Who magazine. It's how, every time you tell that story, it's slightly different, and it's not that there's one true version. It's kind of how you mediate it and tell it. So in that sense, I'm not quite sure what the exact story that led him here was, but it does seem like if he got solo credit for it, that it must be mostly or entirely his script, even if it's from, a story or a plan that was already pretty much there.
Yeah. Oliver, what did you think of, Russell writing the story, but the story itself, what did you think of Winter?
Oh, is it is it spicy to say it's my least favourite? I liked it. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
I'm honestly more interested in the new characters than the old ones. So while it was really nice to get them all in varying degrees of focus in the finale, it does feel very centered around Marcy, even if she's not actually in that much of it. And part of me wanted more of Taylor and the new gang. But I liked the Eldritch stuff. There's a lot of Russellisms, RTD-isms that I really enjoyed. The story doesn't particularly go with the idea, but very early on you get this comparison drawn that Dark Season is a show about the things kids see that adults ignore, and Jack goes, "Oh yeah, like climate change," right? It just sort of says it, and of course that's sort of the natural comparison of the ethos of the show in the modern world is kids are massively concerned about the climate and the environment, and to them at least it feels like adults don't see it. So I thought that was really cool, and I really dug the idea that Taylor's big confrontation, sort of getting defeated by Eldritch, is them getting plugged into the internet, and the internet being the manifestation of all the worst things, every bad bit of humanity streamed into your head. And that idea of the traumatic impact of seeing the world through the web on a kid, I think that's a really interesting bit of RTD pessimism that I like.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's I think I'd probably similarly say that this is, I don't know if it's necessarily the weaker story, but it's definitely not my favourite. It would probably be in the bottom half. I think that is, but there's a lot in this story. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of plot to juggle, and there's something very Russell in the way that is then written. It's almost kind of doing, like trying to do like Stolen Earth or Journey's End or something, where you're trying to find a way to fit in all these characters, and building that all around then production concerns as well. I'm sure the reason why Thomas is kind of there as a phone call is, and obviously there's some discussion about how they originally had a much bigger role for Bridget Forsyth, and that wasn't possible because of her condition. So it's kind of, when writing becomes not just a creative exercise, but also a technical one of how do you juggle, how many lines can you give this actor who's going to be only in for a day or a day or half a day or something. And I think, it does actually pay to have these kind of skills that Russell has to write that, even if then, the audio skills is a separate thing. At the very least, he has those skills of juggle lots of characters, deal with what's there. I think it does well. All the characters are characterized well, which you would absolutely expect when Russell invented most of these characters. And yes, it does slightly sideline the new trio, which is a shame, while still trying to make sure that they're in the center of the narrative. That they're physically there on the scene and repeating the same things. But yeah, I think it's very dramatic. It's tense. The confrontations are good. The dialogue is good and sparky, and all the characters are engaging. The story almost, it's one of these ones where the story is a vehicle to put these characters and scenes together and interact, and the story kind of takes second fiddle to getting to see these characters, different characters interact. Getting to see Marcy and Eldritch again. And I think that was always going to be the way, and that's always in some ways, for depending on what you're looking for, it probably is going to feel less engaging than a story that's kind of stands on its own as a new original piece, because it's got other things to do than just tell a compelling original narrative. So I think it's almost like, I can say that it's not my favorite from the set, but I think it's as good as it was ever going to be. It's, in that sense, I think everything it's trying to do, it does very well. It's just whether you might be slightly more interested in what some of the other ones are trying to do than what this is trying to do.
Yeah, I like the first two stories loads, and then the last two, I like lots of them, but they felt a little less
yeah, absolutely
put together, maybe, but still lots of interesting stuff. Like, there was like a big RTD-ish speech in the first three serials, like once, and then his finale had like
yeah,
loads and loads and loads of them. Like, this will be my final and darkest season of all. There were all sorts of things going on. It was fun.
I did giggle every time Eldritch went, and this dark season will be darker than you've ever darked in your life.
It's interesting how they pick up on that, like, seasons and the dark season thing, but obviously there's not much reference to the turn of the millennium stuff, because obviously that isn't that relevant anymore. The sort of the confrontations in Dark Season feel like, the turn of the millennium's approaching, and you feel like, if there had have been through some strange way, some kind of Dark Season thing, like in the year 2000, or even just something set in the year 2000, if Big Finish decided to go in a different direction with this and set something that wasn't completely contemporary, you'd really kind of pick up on that. Instead, it kind of has to ignore the fact that it was like, it was all building to the year 2000 because we've shot right past that.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it makes sense to then just drop that theme, but then it pulls up on other themes from the original, like the name thing, the thing of the importance of names in terms of identity, and keeping their name a secret. And this is what makes me choose to believe that that the novelization version of Dark Season must be the canon version, because of the fact that the TV series has Marcy make a big deal of not revealing her name to Eldritch, but then Mrs. Maitland comes in and just says Marcy's name right in front of Mr. Eldritch, and it's never commented on. But I think the book, if I remember, kind of rectifies that mistake of having, a character whose name is supposed to be secret from the antagonist have their full name said out loud by someone else while he's in the room. So yeah, the fact that in this it's very clear that Eldritch has not known Marcy's name all this time, and is kind of almost, I kind of like the idea that it's kind of, rather than there's a science fiction element to it in terms of why Marcy doesn't want to reveal her name to him, because she thinks it gives him power over her, but also the idea that, in a way, choosing not to tell someone your name is kind of quite a petulant, quite a childish act, and the Eldritch's response to it isn't some supernatural thing. It's kind of like he's just been annoyed and frustrated all this time that he doesn't know the name of the person who followed his plan. So it's almost him. He's responded to that quite petulant act in quite a, an almost quite an immature way. But yeah, that definitely works better if you believe the novelization version and not that he just overheard her name anyway 30 years ago.
Yeah. So the actual stuff in this story, so it's like the weather is fine, but there's an augmented reality, like bad weather stuff going on at the school. And the first episode here as a whole, like the school attracts all sorts of nasty stuff because of the behemoth underneath. And what else do we have? Reet has that good speech about technology is good, actually. Like, I'm not anti-technology because of the stuff I went through as a kid. Blah, blah, blah. Technology lets you connect. That was very, very Russell about 8 minutes into the first episode. So there's that kind of stuff. The weather stuff is like the plot driving issue, I guess. And then in the second and third episode, it all kind of descends and devolves into the big, I'm getting plugged into the behemoth and I'm in the behemoth and now, angry, and Unit shows up. They're not named as Unit, but they're Units. So that's exciting. Yeah.
They are Unit though, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a tie into our Damaged Goods, I believe. Russell's 90s new adventure novel where I think Marcy is referenced as like someone important in Unit. I haven't read that yet. I will, but that's my understanding.
Oh, cool. Yeah, whatever. Fold it together. I dig that.
Colonel Marcy Hatter, I think, is using the book. So as soon as those soldiers came in, I thought, oh, okay, so he's gonna. Though, I was curious whether Russell would just ignore that, and I kind of, in some ways, because I don't necessarily like the idea of Marcy being attached to the kind of military-industrial complex, I kind of might have preferred it if he ignored it, but I think it's a very Russell instinct to tie these things together, and so, yeah, because he had Colonel Marcy Hatter in that book, and I think, as a unit, Colonel, yeah, they're going with that here, and it works, to be fair, because she's very clearly still has an independent agency and is in charge, and it's not like she's there like bossing soldiers around, she's still an independent figure, and why not tie Dark Season in via Damage Goods, which I suppose, if you took it to its logical extreme, would mean that all of this happens in the Doctor Who universe, which is sort of not necessarily something that really fits that well, but I guess it's just a fun reference.
There's I think there's a sideways sense. I know it's talked about a bit on the extras, like this existed, Dark Season, the TV run, existed in the off-air years of Doctor Who, and it felt kind of like Doctor Who could be this, or this is kind of occupying a similar space. There is that. So it's always felt kind of adjacent to me, but I kind of like that they don't actually say unit directly, because it is, but I like that I don't feel like we've actually, clanged them together exactly. But I kind of like the affirming the unit Marcy thing, even though I don't love it in a vacuum, just because it feels fun to affirm, these old, it's fun for Russell to still think about Damaged Goods and still think about his old books and stuff, I think. It's a nice little thing in that sense. Yeah, I really like Tom in the original run. So my understanding is he's a big, important businessman in Hong Kong now. There was a reference on, I think maybe the video interview of sometimes his appearance in this old kooky 90s kids show is wheeled out to laugh at the boss a little bit. So he's an important guy over there. So he's barely in this set or this finale at all. But it's fun to get, a confirmation of what ended up happening with him. And what he became and where he is. So that was kind of nice that he's included.
He's walking with a gay dads group
in Antarctica, I think. Yeah,
yeah, lovely, lovely. And I love that him and Reet's relationship is so sweet. That they really get on, and the Behemoth connections with Taylor, because your parents, have interfaced with me and blah blah blah.
Yeah, it's all clever. Yeah, I mean, I share your disappointment at Thomas's small part, but I guess with so many moving parts in there, it's kind of in some ways helpful that one of character doesn't have as big a role. I guess I was kind of hoping that as well as the phone call, that he might also turn up at the end when we're doing kind of the coda, but they tease him about the fact that he's coming back to join them, and whether we ever hear that narrative or not, it's nice to think that these characters are coming back together, even off a medium that we can actually hear even outside of the stories.
Yeah. Oh, something I really loved with the finale is the Olivia's revenge thing. That Olivia, the girl from the first Dark Season story that had the Abyss computer and every teacher's pet kind of character, that she had one of the motherboards from the Abyss computers, and then we do an Independence Day, all the technology compatible together, sort of thing. So that was a kind of fun element to add into the finale. I quite liked that.
Yeah, that definitely kind of came out of nowhere, but in a way where it's has Russell been thinking about what happened to Olivia for 30 years, and you kind of think this is his revenge for Olivia. But yeah, I think it works, and again, it's very, very Russell, in a good way. But yeah, I enjoyed that name check, and it's true that this one obviously does invoke that original serial a lot, as well as obviously the Behemoth stuff from the second serial, but there's all the stuff about as you say, the fact that Reet and Thomas interfaced with the Abyss computers becoming an important plot point. It's this is the one that, by nature of characters returning, but also by the direction the plot takes, it's very much a direct sequel to the original. Yeah.
Did you find the way Russell wrote the use of technology and some of the dialogue and exposition around the behemoth and tech stuff in this finale, it reminded me a lot of, you know, in Doctor Who's Series 4 finale when Donna is like twirling the Daleks around and she's doing this big like exposition of I'm using a computer now and I'm like, he does a lot of his exposition around computers is very like it's already big finishy in TV, like saying out loud I'm doing this with a database mainframe. I think he's not as, and why would he be? But he's not as adept at some of the slyer ways to do audio writing than the other three writers here. But, you know, that was kind of fun, I guess.
Yeah, and there is some very exposition-y bits in this. I think more so the other ones, which again partly is just the pace of it and how much is going on and trying to convey that quickly. And also the fact that, you know, stuff like the behemoth and stuff that's coming back in this and being involved. It was an idea designed for TV, but it's now having kind of a sequel on audio, whereas all the other stories are ideas that have been designed specifically for audio. And there's probably even an element to it if Russell's been thinking about this for 30 years and think about his characters, he might not specifically have been thinking about them in an audio medium. So if he's pulling on his own ideas of what might have happened that he's had for ages, he then kind of has to adapt that into a form rather than purposefully creating something for the form, which results in some of that clunkiness.
I think a big part of that is also Eldritch, and complaining about Mr. Eldritch being exposition-y and arch and shouty is dumb because that's his whole character. But it is very exposition-y and shouty, and it's fun, and he does give a good performance. And I enjoy all the evil. He's the most evil ever. And every time a character has to explain to someone else that this guy is literally the worst. He's the worst of humanity put into one body, and I guess that's who he is. I enjoy all of that. But it is also very, very big and loud and arch, and not always what I'm looking for in a story.
There was a little Doctor Who, another shout out besides the Marcy thing. I think Marcy mentions the password for a unit thing as being Buffalo.
Yeah.
That's from the Mickey, I think, says it in the Slovene two-parter from 2005.
I think it's funny they didn't update their security.
Yeah, and the password is like a single word all in lowercase, as opposed to every password security thing that's like, please add several numbers and exclamation marks and everything.
Unit haven't set up two-factor authentication. So.
Kate Winslet had a nice speech in the finale, like the third episode here, of the whole yellow dress. Taylor, remember when you were lost and I found you and, you know, put your arms out and that whole thing. That was nice. That was very Russell. That was nicely done. Yeah,
there's a sincere sentimentality there, which, you know, absolutely helps when you've got performers as strong as Kate Winslet involved doing it. But I think, you know, it sometimes it takes an actor who's willing to be that sincere in that performance to carry off the sincerity of some of these kind of Russell speeches, whereas, you know, so much of kind of, especially genre television these days, everybody can be quite wry and offhand in the way they, you know, because the characters are in the way they play it, but you need a certain type of actor. And I mean, I feel like we've not talked about it enough. She's Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet's in this. Like, that is kind of wild and crazy and also great. And you can hear, I think the fact that she's given so much kind of stuff around being a mother and like these motherly ness and her relationship with Taylor, I think is really strong. And you know, Kate Winslet obviously has a very close relationship with her own child. I don't know if she's got multiple, but like I know that she did that Channel 4 thing where she acted alongside her daughter, and like I think you can tell that, you know, not obviously she's an amazing actor and she could play whatever you give her, but the fact that it's something that feels quite specific to that actor and what those that actors like creative concerns are at the moment, what her interests her creatively, you know, is clearly mother and child relationship. So the fact that she gets to perform that in this is really strong, and I think that's probably where the best kind of material comes from in terms of that legacy cast returning stuff. Like the Marcy Eldritch stuff is great. Is maybe and it's good characterization, it's good acting, it's engaging to listen to. But I think the stronger thematic stuff in terms of that legacy stuff is from the relationship between Reet and Taylor and how that's characterized.
Yeah.
There's also just a fun inversion of Kate Winslet, who is one of the biggest names ever, is in all the episodes, pretty much.
Yeah.
She might not get a line in episode 3, but she's in the whole thing, in the show, in a major way, as a good but basically ordinary mum, where Marcy is Victoria Lambert isn't an enormously well-known performer, but her role here is wrapped in myth and mystique in a fun inversion. That the big famous huge actor is playing a more ordinary character who's in more of the show, and the person who has all the myth built up around them is less so.
The opposite of what I expected, yeah. I thought Kate Winslet would have like a cameo in the last episode and we'd have a lot of Marcy and, scatterings of everyone else, but everyone's back in the finale except Winslet, who's like in everything. Yeah, it's awesome. It's exactly the opposite of what I anticipated.
And it makes sense of the characters.
I was going to say, it definitely seems like once they got, Kate Winslet, I mean, they had her for a day of recording, a day in studio. Big Finish are very adept at having someone record separately from everybody else for a day and somehow have lines in, a whole box set or 3 whole box sets or whatever.
Yeah.
And this does have that feel of, okay, we've got this actor, let's integrate them throughout the set. And as I say in the video interview, Russell did talk about deliberately writing up that part once they knew they had Kate on board, which I think is strong. And yeah, from a character point of view, it makes sense to have Reet be the one that's more featured. I think if you have Marcy involved in the early episodes, a lot of them would be resolved a lot differently, a lot more easily, whereas Reet kind of stays on the fringes more easily, I think. Yeah.
There's the really interesting RTD speech in this finale was Eldritch's speech about the water and the ocean and, why he kind of spared Marcy towards the end. I thought that was a great speech. Like, it was really well written, but I'm still kind of unclear. Like, it felt a little, I either missed something or it felt a bit contrived to me. Like, why exactly is he letting them go? Do you guys have a better understanding of that?
I think I agree with it's a bit contrived. Like, I think what it's trying to say is that, maybe again it links back to this almost childishness with him being sort of petulant about having, not known her name for so long. The idea that he wants her to be there to see his ultimate victory, his dark season, whenever that comes, if ever that comes. But it does also, I wonder if there's an element of like, again, we don't know much about Eldritch in terms of what he is. Like, we understand he's not human. All the speeches are like, he's evil, he's all the evil things. But there's no real kind of then. So if he's kind of like almost like a cosmic force, is there an element of kind of like, Marcy being there as like the good balance against his evil, like I don't know, I'm reaching a bit, but I do think it, like, on a character level, like with those two actors performing it kind of works and it feels nice, and it feels like, the idea that Marcy wasn't just somebody that Eldritch faced a couple times, but Marcy was actually somebody that left a huge impression on Eldritch, despite him being this kind of ageless, whatever he is, I think is quite strong. Like, the fact that Marcy as a child managed to do more to affect him than anyone else in, ever. So I believe in them having like a relationship where Eldritch has, if not a respect for her, then like a real curiosity about her and wants her to be there, and feels like it's right that she should, when she turns up, it's like a moment for him of like, yes, this is how it should have been. This is how it should always be. Me and you against each other kind of thing. But yeah, quite why he would actually then let her go is a separate question, I guess. And there's part of me, I don't know if we're ever going to see any sequel to this. If we did, it'd be great. And even if we did, I don't think I'd want it to pick up on those elements straight away. But if we ever do get a continuation of this, maybe that will be explained one day. But who knows, to be honest.
I did like how it ended on it's not really a cliffhanger, but like a setup to another story, just like the TV show did with that physical body, online avatar scanning dating center thing. That was fun. But I love the bit before that, the conversation of everyone sans Tom, unfortunately, like catching up, and the big honouring of the OG Mrs. Maitland. That was all very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like her part in this. Like, it's small, and she doesn't get to be that much involved in the narrative, but just having her there. And I think the bit that stood out for me is the fact that she's first and foremost concerned about the kids. Like, they're new kids that she's not met before, but the idea that, when the younger Miss Maitland is going to take the kids into school, that the original Mrs. Maitland, her priority is look after them. The idea that actually she, far apart from the fact that she experienced all this kind of fantastical science fiction stuff back in the day, the fact that she's first and foremost like a teacher, like that she genuinely, her priority is kind of like safeguards the children. That's what she cares about. That I really liked that, because she doesn't get much to do, but I felt like that was a strong beat motivation for her, just to say, she is, it's the kids that she's there to protect, and that's. Yeah, it was good to have her there, despite the fact that narratively I don't think you would lose much by taking her out. I think, it felt right that she was there, and it's a shame that she wasn't able to do a big role, but she still gets really good, dialogue. She's in there more than Thomas, and it's good stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's not really an in-story explanation for it, but I think the Eldritch letting Marcy go and going, I will return, is more sort of, even though this might well be a one-off, it's trying to do that feeling of the original being a serial, this long-running, ongoing story of this guy who turns up every year. And I think that's part of what the structure of this box set really manages, is that sort of cyclical feeling of every school year is like this. There's a dark season every year, and we're going to need to turn up every time to beat evil, and we're just going to have to keep doing it every year of our school lives. That feels quite a part of the school focus of how the whole show works. The idea that it's always going to come back, and the bad guy's always going to turn back up, and it wouldn't be a school year if Mr. Eldritch didn't turn up and try to microwave everybody with robots or whatever.
I liked the implication. I'm assuming I interpreted this correctly. That with Marcy at the end, we're kind of scanning through her life a bit. They had 3 partners, but none ever lasted. There was another man her mind was too occupied with, but that season has passed. That being like Eldritch, obviously not romantically, but like she'd been so focused on her goals of, how is Eldritch Returns going to be handled. But now, I like that kind of rejuvenating idea that Marcy is like 30 years older, but, still a new season will, sprout in their life. Like the dark season ethos might be a bit that adults are like boring and despairing and suck, and life is worse for them. But I like that the new things can still happen to them. They're not like finished, even though they're boring. I liked that, or I found that assuring myself.
The idea that kind of Marcy has been like preoccupied with this and what's been going on, and it's affected her life. I think it's really strong, and it's like it's seeded in with kind of a lot of the legacy characters. The idea that like the fact that Reet has stayed nearby the school because of her, curiosity about what's going, the idea that it's like these sentinels, like protective, they know something else is coming. They know this school is still a place where these strange things can happen. And that's why, Miss Maitland's there as the librarian as well, because she's heard the stories from her mother. The idea, I kind of love the idea of these kind of older characters as kind of like watchers and observers around this school environment, kind of waiting for something to happen. And the idea, that Ree thinks, and then the fact that then she then sends her child there is either a lot of confidence in the child or a lack of concern for safety there, if you think an evil force is going to rise up in this school again. But yeah.
There's something really nice and child logic about that as well. Because questions like, why did you never move away from the area you grew up in, don't have simple answers. But sort of beneath answers like that, beneath those questions, the idea that your mom has some complex, unfinished business with sort of the institution of the school and the bad things that come from it. That's quite a fitting answer from the child's perspective, only seeing things in the margins and the unknown.
The original Mrs. Maitland actress. So my understanding from the extras, the thing I've inferred, I could be wrong, is that originally most of the material for her daughter was going to be her, but then when it became clearer that, she is Parkinson's, the original Mrs. Maitland actress, and they took the sound guys to her place, and like Handcock remote directed her for the recording. So they made it all work really well for the finale, but and she sounded ecstatic talking about, she really loved doing the show, and she was sharing anecdotes on the extras and things, and she was honored that RTD thought of her and everything. So she sounded super happy to be in there, and RTD sounded very happy to have her, but like not capable to do because her daughter was in the show heaps, like across all the episodes. That's a lead role. That's the lead role along with the trio. So I think that's good handling of, it's like it's not just honoring the past, it's also incorporating the past in like a cool and active way, but it's still doing the new stuff in a way that, makes all the narrative functions work and everything. So that was all. I guess it's Handcock and RTD are both really good producers, and so they pulled that off all very well, I thought.
Yeah, responding to production problems in a way that actually benefits the story creatively. I think having the younger Miss Maitland there as librarian actually adds to that kind of legacy feeling of the original, whereas if you just had the original character there, there'd be a sense that she would know all this stuff exactly, whereas having it be the daughter who's been told these stories, you're still, although she's less skeptical than the original Mrs. Maitland was at the start of the original Dark season, she's still allowed to have an element of skepticism and kind of build up to building a relationship with the kids because she is only heard these things through stories. And I think in the end it benefits to have a new one. It kind of fits with that younger generation vibe if there's also a younger generation for the teacher, and I love how it's tied in with a familiar relationship. But yeah, it's obviously not what they intended, and I think on a creative, artistic level, it actually works really well, perhaps stronger. So yeah, I
know we mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, but Kate Winslet was just great in all of this, and it was so nice. I think Russell mentions like originally the vibe at Big Finish was kind of like, oh, there's no way, or maybe we'll get it for a cameo, but like there's no way. And Russell as well. She's always spoken very highly of Dark Season because that was like her first proper TV drama. Like she talks in the extras and stuff about how that's like where she learnt properly blocking and, changing takes and everything and how that works. It's a very, treasured and important experience to her. And she's sprung it up over the years, to interviewers and stuff. So Russell thought, well, there's clearly she has good feelings about it. So maybe she'd be keen on this. And then, the whole story of Jason Haigh-Gallery got in contact with her team, and then she emailed Russell, and then they had a chat, and it all worked out brilliantly. It was really nice on the extras. She was just very happy. And like when she starts comparing water stuff in Titanic to like the flooding of the Behemoth set in the show, and you can hear, RTD, outright say, this is insane. We've got the lead of Titanic comparing my 1991, dinky little TV show to it. It's just one of those very surreal Big Finish things. Like there's Kate Winslet on the cover. She's actually properly in this, and she's really nice, in the extras. It was a really nice experience having her on this. And her and Russell sound like they got on really well. I know, I think Handcock said they ate away an hour of time on the day together just because they kept talking and not recording. So, but that's a lovely thing. It's nice that Russell says he reckons one of the reasons everyone came back is because everyone had a good time on the original run. And so it's nice that it sounded like everyone had a great time. The original Mrs. Maitland and Kate Winslet and everyone had a good time with this one, which is a really nice thing.
And it's really no surprise because, she's a professional, but she is capital A acting, like really.
Oh yeah, she's so good.
She's given it her all. She's great. And almost everyone in this is really good, but she's Kate Winslet good.
I thought the actor for Mr. Eldritch also did pretty well. Like I really I love the hamminess of that performance in the show and in this, but him sounding a bit insecure on the extras, being like, "Well, I haven't acted. I don't act anymore. I'm an agent."
Yeah,
that's how he's a friend of Andy Pryor, who of course RTD works with. That's how the kind of connection there went. But I thought he did great. He was as hammy and melodramatic as ever, and I had I love listening to his voice. He's a really fun actor and part, so he went great.
Yeah, I said it when we were talking about episode 3. As soon as he came in, with that voice, I just thought he had such presence. He just then stole the scene that he was introduced in, and it's interesting to talk about that actor's insecurity because I just think he was brilliant and basically every bit as good as he was in 1991. It's really strong performances all round. But I think him and Kate Winslet were the ones of the returning cast that really stood out. I
guess as much as the youth stuff is the driving most important thing, and the young actors in this are loads of fun and everything. But I like it's kind of the other side of that is it's really fun bringing these old, often retired actors out, at least retired from acting, into stuff. Like I love the story of, we talked about it on our Series 1 chat, how they got Marcy's actress back by, noticing a header image of a Victoria Lambert on Facebook being what looked like the paddle and that being the clue. Getting in contact, are you the Victoria Lambert? On Facebook. And getting Tom's actor back, Scott Handcock has a friend who brags that, I'm friends with Dark Season Tom on Facebook. And that's how the kind of connection started there. And that apparently both Tom and Marcy's actors were a bit apprehensive at first, getting these weird Facebook messages of, we're a legit company and we want to pay you to come act your 1990s roles, out. Just come to this building and record yourself and that sort of thing, that they thought, am I walking into a trap? But, it's great that it all worked out in the end. I like the kind of, it's fun to bring retired people back as much as it's fun to get new, kind of souls involved in drama as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's the whole legacy sequel thing here, that it actually does balance really well. It brings in great new characters with great new actors, and it brings back these amazing older characters that maybe the actors haven't performed in a while. And, the legacy sequel thing is everywhere now. It's, I think people do think of things like the sort of big budget things like, Star Wars or whatever, but you can just as easily point at children's TV and soap operas where you've got stuff like the Beaker Girls or the Waterloo Road reboot that are doing this. You don't just reboot anything anymore. You bring back the original cast to play older parts in it and stuff. And I think this is a prime example of that would probably work. That you'd probably do it almost the exact same way if you were doing it on television. Maybe, I don't know if you do something slightly different with Eldritch, because with appearances there, maybe Eldritch is supposed to be ageless. That wouldn't work quite as well. But in terms of how you'd embrace that legacy sequel idea, I think if you were rebooting Dark Season for television, you would do the same thing. You'd do the same concept. You wouldn't say, it needs to be all new, or it needs to be just the old ones. You'd do the same thing because that's what's on trend at the moment.
I saw just a random point from the Handcock RTD YouTube interview. Is RTD kind of quickly, almost in passing, says, I see Eldritch as the devil, kind of literally. What do we think of that?
Again, it's very Russell, we know he was quite involved in the Impossible Planets. That's the Satan Pit Doctor Who story. That's credited to a different writer. And I think I think it's interesting for a man who is an atheist but has written so much about religion. In The Second Coming, you've also got sort of Mark Benton as the devil, and yeah, it's he clearly does. I think he believes in the concept of evil, which, if you're talking about it for him in a fantasy sci-fi context, you can kind of, rather than having the concept of evil be like, oh, it's the Black Guardian, or it's, some random name for an old ancient being, you might as well just say that is the devil, because in practical terms, it is anyway. But it's interesting how he, conceptualizing evil as like a physical, natural force rather than just a thing that people do, is very in keeping with Russell's other work, and that's, it's an interesting offhand comment to refer to just announce that your villain is actually the literal Christian devil in a behind the scenes interview. But I think basically that is what he's saying. Is like, it completely, it doesn't actually really change the perspective from a character from all the dialogue that's like, he's all the evil that men do. Like, he is evil, all evil. So, yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought that was pretty much text, even from the original series, because Russell's conception of the devil is just what Eldritch is, all the bad stuff. All the bad stuff put in one person. I think that the idea that you get in this set that Eldritch is someone you've got to keep fighting your whole life, ties up with how Russell sees fighting against evil and all different forms of evil that actually exist. It's something you live your life around doing. It takes up such a huge physical part of your time and your being, and you've just got to keep doing it. And even when it looks like you've won, he's gonna get away and come back next time, and there'll always be another fight against evil. That's all very Russell.
Yeah. My last thoughts, if you guys have any more, of course, we'll open to that in a second. I just want to read out my last little thing to say, which is kind of just viewing this in light of Russell coming back to Doctor Who, obviously starting with, an anniversary celebration, the David Tennant return celebration, and then moving into a whole new era. I just think it's interesting to view some of this stuff in light of that. Like, the first thing was experiencing an RTD finale again reminded me of what RTD finales were like. So that was a fun priming. But like in the anniversary sense, in the Vortex magazine, when Russell's talking about why this box set exists at all, he says, "I hadn't realized it had been 30 years since we made Dark Season. David Richardson, Big Finish producer, wrote to me and suggested an anniversary audio, and I thought, what a good idea. Asked if Handcock could produce and direct it, because you get something with Handcock. He went through options, and then Handcock and RTD went through, are we going to new cast in the present day, or you have the old cast and, do the story again? Do we do new stories with links to original characters, kind of a legacy sequel stuff Bryn's talked about, and how they decided how they were, going to go about it. And then another thing, so this is kind of an anniversary celebration project, and so kind of seeing how RTD ended up conceiving of it, I think is interesting to think about, because he's moving into, that sort of thing with Doctor Who as well. And another thing maybe you can read there is when RTD's talking about how he got Kate Winslet back, one of the things he says is, in Vortex, he says, I actually wrote her a letter, a proper note saying how honoured I'd been to work with her in the first place and how lovely it would be to do this. And that's how he got immediate reply with her phone number. So that extra, RTD works hard, I guess, to really connect with his actors and, do like the big overtures to them and stuff like that, which maybe, I think was kind of the other way around with how David Tennant and Catherine Tate came back. They all kind of got excited together. But just interesting to see, there's some actors RTD probably couldn't bring back with a big overture, but there's some he can. There's some he can. And last little RTD thing I just have to bring up is, it's a Doctor Who connection. It's just him saying how delighted he was about how the whole box set worked and bringing back Bridget Forsyth and all that. And that he says, I always like to think that everything I write is all set in the same world. There are small hints here and there that Marcy is actually working for UNIT, and I wrote a Doctor Who novel in 1986. So I was wrong calling it a 90s novel. It's older than that. 1986, Damaged Goods, which actually had a Colonel or Sergeant Marcy Hatter, so we kind of confirm in this that when she's off stage, before she comes center stage, she's working for very important people in this sphere. I love that it's all connected. And of course, UNIT seem to be getting promoted pretty hard with the incoming Doctor Who anniversary and then Shooty Gatwa's first series. So UNIT's in Russell's brain, perhaps partly from a 1986 novel and doing Dark Season again. So lots of connections.
I don't know if that's a typo in the vortex or something, but it definitely should be 1996, not 1986.
Okay, so my instincts were right. That's good.
Yeah, I think if Russell had written a Seventh Doctor novel a year before the Seventh Doctor existed, that wouldn't quite work. So
good point.
Yeah. Yeah, my only kind of thought on the Russell-ness of it all and connecting with Doctor Who and stuff is that Russell is clearly in like an intensely nostalgic part of his career. Like, first there's, this big legacy sequel audio thing, then the entire returning to Doctor Who and bringing back so much production crew, as well as obviously David and Catherine for the specials. And then even, thinking about something like his recent dramas, which aren't obviously sequels to existing things, but Nolly and It's a Sin are both intensely nostalgic dramas in very different ways, but Nolly is all about a certain era of television, a certain style of acting and recording television that's gone out of vogue and kind of celebrating that. And then It's a Sin is kind of a time capsule of an entire decade, and it's much compared to Nolly, it's much more challenging and much more about the negative side of that as well, which is it's the act of remembering in a more, I guess you could say, a more political or more way than something like Nolly. But it's interesting that Russell is obviously reaching a point where that kind of looking back and seeing what can we do with that, both on the sort of sequels level and in that just way. I think it's a thing of reaching a certain age. Not to suggest that young people are not also very nostalgic for things, but the fact that that's sort of taken over his career so much, I think it also is in keeping with the trends of things. But yeah, the last thing that like Russell wrote that wasn't like years and years is set mostly in the future. This is contemporary, but it's a sequel to something like when was the last time that Russell wrote something that was like kind of contemporary standalone? Is basically like Cucumber, because after that you had so many. He's written quite a few period dramas recently with A Very English Scandal. I say that's recently, that's like 6 years now, but you know what I mean in terms of that. And It's a Sin and Nolly, and it's interesting to see, given how much of his everything between like Queer as Folk and Mine or Mine, you've got 4 shows in about 5 years that are all kind of contemporary, and now that does seem to be less of a thing. But I guess the new era of Doctor Who will have plenty of episodes set in the contemporary world, and it'd be interesting to see how those are handled even in the context of returning characters and science fiction stuff. So that's my thoughts on Russell and how this kind of fits into his wider work at the moment.
It's so interesting. Like, backwards looking sounds like really negative, so I don't know if that's the right term, but I remember a few years ago at like a Radio Times party, he was hanging out with Stephen Moffat, and Moffat's like saying, I still get ideas. And Russell was saying, well, I don't think of Doctor Who so much anymore. I moved on, and, now I think of other things as much as I love Who. And then he seems to, like in the Handcock video interview, Russell outright says, you never stop. You never forget stuff you've written before. It never ends. It's always ticking over in your head. Dark Season's been in my head forever, so of course there's new Dark Season. It's funny he's kind of changed tack there. Yeah, it's really interesting how his last few years of his career have gone in that sense.
I'm not sure I believed it at the time. That Radio Times interview with Stephen Moffat, I'm not sure I believed what he was saying there. I think as a writer, you want to try to keep moving forward, but the past has a lot of gravitational pull to it. And the more work you produce, obviously, the more mass accumulates in your past and the stronger the gravitational pull of it. I think it's natural to enter a nostalgic period. But I also think it's interesting, and the fresh feeling of a new generation that you get in these audios is something I'm really looking forward to in the next era of Doctor Who. And I'm curious to see to what degree the legacy aspects of this box set are going to recur in his new era of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Bonnie Langford is returning to play Mel in Doctor Who, which, in terms of legacy sequel stuff, bringing back old... I mean, that's wild and is very much in keeping with what we've just been discussing, I think.
And I'm really interested in the approach. To me, at the moment at least, the 60th and then Series 14 of Doctor Who feel like one unit, where I think it's interesting that the nostalgic stuff is almost dealt with beforehand. And then obviously, like you say, there's a lot of nostalgic stuff in the series itself. But I'm interested to see whether it feels like revisiting legacy characters for 3 episodes at the start and then moving on to a fresh new thing. Or whether it's more integrated like it is in Dark Season.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it will be a case of finding a way to do something fresh, new with those legacy characters, which arguably this final episode of the Dark Season box set isn't really. Like, it's Marcy and Eldritch again arguing when it's all about the Behemoth, as they have the same confrontation. Which is, so I feel like that's probably going to end up being quite a contrast to what these Doctor Who specials do, which is probably going to tell completely new and fresh stories with a legacy cast that really distinguish themselves. Although at the same time, one of those stories is literally an adaptation of a comic from the 80s. So freshness mixed with 80s-ness, but yeah.
One wonders.
Yeah. Do we have anything else to say, or are we seasoned out?
That's pretty much it. I mean, I do hope maybe there'll be a future Dark Season thing. It doesn't sort of seem like the series that Big Finish can, pump out like 4 box sets a year of, which I think is a good thing. I think it should remain something, special and not too, not 9th Doctor box sets that are coming out every 2 or 3 months or whatever. But if we ever did get more in the future, I think that would be absolutely great. I'd love to see, what direction it would go in. I would absolutely want, the characters from this one, the new original characters, to continue and see where their stories go. So, yeah, that's kind of my only thought on that. Whether that will happen or anytime soon, I don't know, but it'd be nice. It's also, I guess, complicated by the fact that Scott Handcock no longer works for Big Finish because he's script editing on Doctor Who. That might be one of the bigger factors that delays it, but we'll see.
Maybe another 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that wraps up our discussion of Dark Season 2, Dark Season Legacy Rising. Let us know what you thought of the sequel series here, also the original series as well. The 4 serials we discussed, any of the behind-the-scenes stuff we talked about, any of the stuff we had to say about the episodes, any of the stuff we did say or didn't say, your thoughts. We love all of that. It's cool that people are still talking about and making Dark Seasons. So yeah, go ahead, comment, share what you think. We love to see it. And yeah, thank you very much for listening as always. Cheers.